The first player I want to think about, the first player I want to introduce as a great teammate for Trae Young is someone that's already out there. He's given high praise to, and it's kind of been floating as a rumor that this could happen already. Wemby, Trae Young, and Wemby would be like almost perfect. That's probably the best person on my list, the best person I could think of to pair Trae Young with. Trae is still young. He's 25 years old. That would probably be a scenario where he would have to be traded to San Antonio. So the Spurs would have to be hunting Trae to be like, yo, we want you here with Wemby as we go into this new era. I mean, I think that would be beautiful. Imagine the lob threats. I mean, if you know anything about, if you watch Trae Young going downhill off pick and rolls, his lob threat game is elite. And imagine him having Wemby as a target. The versatility of Wemby and all the different things he can do at his size paired with Trae Young. I mean, that is the ultimate relief both for Wemby and Trae Young. I mean, you see what Wemby is doing now, essentially as the focal point with the Spurs. Pair him with a Trae Young who can take down entire teams and organizations and playoff series. Like he is a team killer. Look at what we remember what he did to the Knicks in the Garden. Like he will single-handedly take you out. But you put him with another player like a Wemby and some of these other guys I'm going to talk about. That's where you're going to really see magic start to happen. So I think Trae Young and Wemby, anyone who thinks about that, it's hard to not think of how that would be like almost perfect and really dynamic. And it would be great for both of their careers, in my opinion. Next on my list is Anthony Edwards. So Minnesota is obviously, they've been a top seed in the Western Conference this season. They're playing well and they're starting to put together something there. I still have questions. I think a lot of us still have question marks, but they're still putting it together. And it's cool that they at least have bought into Anthony Edwards really being their best player. Kind of between him and Cat, but I think they're doing a pretty good job making it work. They're winning games, more games than they've won in a while. So things are looking good for Minnesota, but I think that we could still monitor that situation. Anthony Edwards is from Atlanta. That could play a factor maybe in Atlanta trying to lure him there to play with Trae Young. I don't know how that would really work best. I don't know if there's really an ideal scenario for either way in terms of Trae Young going to Minnesota or Anthony Edwards going to Atlanta. But I think you're looking at two scenarios where now Ant does have Cat, and I think Minnesota is making, I know they're making better strides over there much quicker than Atlanta has made with Trae Young. In terms of their draft picks, in terms of their trade moves, like Minnesota's been trying. They've been making moves and they've been at least evolving. And of course, Anthony Edwards kind of becoming what he's becoming now is a huge advantage for them in itself. But we could kind of monitor that situation in Minnesota to see, is that, because we know the Timberwolves don't have a great history of holding on to their superstars anyway. So over time, maybe in a few years' time, that could be something that Trae and Anthony Edwards talk about in terms of teaming up. Like that point guard, shooting guard combination, that would be a good start. You still got to round out the rest of the roster, of course. But man, to have a backcourt of Trae Young and Anthony Edwards, you could absolutely sign me up for that. I think that would make a lot of sense. And that would be, again, I'm looking at situations where both players could probably use each other based on where they are. Like, again, Anthony Edwards making much better progress with Minnesota right now in his situation, but we could still monitor that, and something could open up, and maybe that could become a possibility that could make sense for him and for Trae Young sometime in the near future. All right, my next one is Paolo, and I actually kind of love the idea of Orlando looking to make some kind of move or trade for Trae Young. I think they might have the assets. They certainly have cap space. From what I've seen, they're one of the top teams in cap space right now. They have guard assets. I think they would have the assets to at least present a trade, but to team up with, for the primary purpose of teaming up Trae Young with Paolo. Another dual forward. Paolo is still young, still only getting better. Right, he's having his best year this year for sure, and he just keeps evolving, keeps getting better. I think him as a forward, as a versatile forward who can score, who can do different things, pairing him, someone like him up with Trae Young, that's the kind of energy that I would love to see. Another up and coming young star in Paolo to play alongside with Trae Young. I think their 2-man game would be really good. And I like the sound and idea of maybe Trae Young in Orlando specifically with Paolo and with that roster, because they have a lot of young assets. They have a lot of good things. To me, I really like what Orlando's been doing, and I think they could use more of an explosive lead guard, scoring guard like a Trae Young in that situation to pair with Paolo. Because again, the Eastern Conference is stacked. We know who the players are: Boston, Milwaukee. Philly's in there when Embiid is healthy. You still have Miami floating around, and the Knicks are very real and competitive right now. So these are all teams making the leap over teams like, they're above Orlando, Atlanta, Charlotte, right? Obviously Washington. But when you look at the potential for Orlando, I think bringing in, it would be a huge swing, but I think that would be a move to say, okay, now we can take them a little more seriously. So the pairing of Paolo and Trae Young, I think, would make sense for a lot of reasons. Another forward that I think would be really cool to see team up with Trae Young is Zion. New Orleans is kind of funky. I still can't really get a read on their potential. I love Brandon Ingram and Zion together. I love CJ McCollum there, and I think they have some decent things happening with their roster. But in terms of shaking things up, I think, again, not sure with this one what would be more ideal in terms of Trae going to New Orleans or Zion going to Atlanta. But in terms of shaking things up, which I already think Atlanta has to be trying something. I mean, trading Trae Young would imply that they're starting over and looking to rebuild. But they may have to look at doing that in the next couple of years if they can't get out of this cycle of mediocrity in the Eastern Conference. But New Orleans is kind of in a similar spot, right? They're just kind of funky. You don't consider them elite, but they have potential. So I think them looking to shake things up, bringing in a different kind of young lead explosive scoring guard like Trae Young to pair him with Zion, again, that would open up lob threats. I think he would make the game a lot easier for someone like Zion. And alongside Zion, obviously Zion is doing all that physical dirty work inside that kind of offsets what Trae does on the perimeter. So that would be a little different, but I think Trae Young and Zion together, I love that combination of Trae, everything he does on the perimeter, and Zion, everything he does from the free throw line below. Also, Zion is a really, really underrated playmaker. I've talked about that before. Really underrated playmaker. So that 2-man game would be dynamic, not just from an explosive, high flying alley-oop standpoint, but even just from making plays. That would add so much to their passing game, operating out of a Trae Young and Zion 2-man game. So I would love that as a potential team up for Trae Young to link up possibly with Zion. My last one is kind of a wild card here, and bear with me on this. This is kind of a little bit of a hot take, but I think this is another one that could make sense for a couple of reasons. Ja Morant. I think that obviously with the setbacks and stuff of the gun stuff and everything with Ja, and obviously he got hurt, so he's out for the rest of this year, and we kind of don't expect Memphis to do anything. But Memphis is another team I feel like maybe you guys need to shake things up. Trae and Ja obviously would be kind of a weird guard pairing. But I do think it could kind of be like a new age version of a Russ and Harden. And they've been able to kind of make that work with the right players around them also, in addition to them. But I think that balance of your more perimeter oriented, skilled shooting off the bounce, making plays off the bounce in terms of shooting, floaters, more of the kind of finesse scoring shooting game, deep threat game. The combination of that with Ja Morant's explosiveness at the rim and his ability to dominate scoring in the paint might make a lot of sense just basketball wise. Again, you got 2 point guards. I get it, but I feel like that could make sense. Ja can play off the ball. He can be a cutter. life can be a lot easier for him not having to handle the ball all the time and to be the lead guard. Trae Young is more of a 3-point threat, so you add gravity to the to an offense where you still have Ja Morant. Like, what if Memphis really looked at trying to bring in Trae Young, whatever that may look like, to team up Trae with Ja Morant? It could also inject some new life into Memphis. I just feel like between the suspension and then the injury with Ja Morant being out, I just feel like that organization has lost so much like momentum and life. And obviously when he comes back healthy, it will be exciting and that life will kind of come back. But I still think you've been looking at a roster. Like I love Desmond Bane. I love some of the other players they have. I love Jaren Jackson Jr. Like, they've had young players growing and developing alongside each other. But I don't know. I just think between all the stuff with Ja, and not being able to really secure Memphis as like a contender, and with other teams developing and still getting better and still competing in the West, I just feel like you don't want to just rely on Ja coming back and being the sole savior of that franchise, even though Memphis has made more progress than Atlanta in their conference. Just feel like if they want to see a jolt of energy, maybe look at teaming up Ja with another elite level player, in this case a guard, another point guard, where they can kind of work off each other and terrorize the league together. I mean, I think they can make that work. I would see that as like a new age kind of Russ and Harden, and maybe a little more explosive even, because they're younger, and both of them are more in their prime.
There needs to be multiple faces of the NBA. And I think that's where we've gotten lost of appreciating players of different calibers. Now, both players are both point guards. They're both point guards. One is more of a skill trait set point guard in Trae, and the other one is more of a high-flying point guard in Ja. But to me, both players will win an MVP before their career is done. I believe both players will bring a championship to their franchises before they're done. And they're going to be a lot like, Isaiah, Magic, and Bird. Like, all three of those guys won championships for their franchises. And I think Trae Young and Ja Morant are both going down that line of bringing championships to their franchises.
People want to know who's going to be the next face of the league, who's going to take over. Anthony Edwards, SGA, like all of these great young talents coming up, but it won't be until one of them wins that we start to separate them from the others. Situation and fit and organization definitely matter. Like, where you get drafted definitely matters. And unfortunately for Trae Young, in my opinion, in Atlanta, I don't see anything going anywhere fast. And the only way out is to figure out who is going to be the ideal person for him to team up with. And to me, that's when we're going to see really the most meaningful basketball of Trae Young's career. He's done a great job of making Atlanta at least relevant, playoff competitive. They've won some series. They've been to the conference finals. But it's not until they're able to at least get him another elite level, star level player that we're going to see Trae Young really get to play up to his capabilities. And I would personally hate, as someone who loves his game and thinks the world of his potential just as a superstar talent, I think we are being shortchanged. We're not seeing really what the greatness of Trae Young on display. Not until we see him play with high level talent. I know it doesn't happen for everyone, and I'm not pitching for him to become part of the next super team, but the culture of teaming up is already happening. So I couldn't help but start to project early on, like, okay, out of these young stars, they're all great talents. Some of them are in better situations than others, but who's gonna look around after a few years and say, man, I'm tired of just getting bounced out the first round every year. I want to go play with that guy. I want to go team up over there. I want to see like what can we do here? Who's going to team up out of these young stars? I've been talking about it for a while. I think Trae Young is going to be a candidate for wanting to look around and ask around and say, hey, what might you want to do? Because I'm ready to start talking about winning now. Thanks for watching or listening to this episode. Let me know your thoughts on Trae Young down in the comments of this video, and subscribe to Basketball Society for more episodes of the show.